Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Simpson, Programs Lead at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. We are so glad you are all here for another installment of Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center's In Conversation with a Survivor series. This virtual series focuses on the personal stories and testimony of Holocaust and genocide survivors, aligning with our work on Holocaust education, defending human rights, and combating anti-Semitism, racism, and other forms of hate. We are honored to have Michel Jeruchim on this evening's program, who will share his story of surviving the Holocaust. A special thank you to the Claims Conference based in New York for connecting us with Michel, as he is a member of their Speakers Bureau. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so folks who are unable to attend today can watch at a later date. You are more than welcome to submit your questions using the chat function throughout the program, and we will get to them during the Q&A portion. I am proud to be joined by my colleague Elena Kingsbury, Director of Holocaust Curriculum and Learning at the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center, and host of In Conversation. On that note, I will hand it over to you, Elena.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Happy Hanukkah to everybody celebrating, in spite of some of the heaviness that we may be feeling while lighting the candles this year. During difficult times, it is important for us to find opportunities to come together and draw strength from stories of survival and resilience in the face of hate. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by Michel Jeruchim. Michel is a Holocaust survivor and educator who has shared his testimony with thousands of people, and tonight we will have the privilege of bearing witness alongside them. Michel's life began in France, where he was born shortly before the outbreak of the Second World War. In 1940, when he was 3 years old, Nazi Germany invaded France. 2 years later, a roundup of Jews in Paris led to mass deportations to concentration camps. The Jeruchim family, Michel's parents, brother, and sister, escaped arrest but were forced to flee. Michel was hidden in Normandy by a French Catholic family while his parents were caught trying to cross into unoccupied France and deported to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. After the war, the family who sheltered Michel sought to adopt him, but an uncle who had survived reclaimed him and his siblings. Michel spent time in an orphanage before immigrating to the United States in 1949, and he later became an aerospace engineer and was among those at the forefront of the communications age. Today, Michel frequently speaks about his experiences during the war. He is also the author of memoir Out of the Shadows, a memoir, Survival in Nazi-Occupied France and Making a Life in America, which was published in 2019 and is available for purchase now. So please let us know if you would like a copy. We'll remind you at the end of the program. Michel, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll share your slides, and please feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
I'm ready.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal for inviting me to tell you my story. You listeners, are probably aware that individuals who experience trauma do not want to talk about it at all, in particular concentration camp survivors. I was not ever in a concentration camp, an experience that words cannot describe. However, when I began writing my story, I asked myself, who is a survivor? I concluded that any Jew living in part of Europe under the Nazi occupation and who wasn't murdered is a survivor. Of course, not every survival experience is equivalent. Trauma takes many shapes. I kept my story inside for pretty much my entire life. In my case, the credit for opening the door, as it were, goes to my wife, Joan, who is a psychologist and understood the necessity of telling the story for me to come to terms with it to the extent possible.
I can't get it. I'll just wait to.
Okay. But the deciding event for me to come out was the birth of our first grandchild, Sarah. Upon her birth, I decided that she could not grow up without knowing her grandpa's story. Still, it took many more years to break down my resistance. And next, first slide. Here is the girl who launched 1,000 words. The bigger one of them. If I move my cursor, can you see it? Not really.
No.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There she is. Yeah. And between then and now, she acquired a few siblings. My story begins in Paris on April 4, 1937. Next slide, please. That was the day I was born in a hospital in the 14th arrondissement, which you can see. I assume everybody knows what that is. Arrondissement, it's an area in Paris. And the household that I was born in already had two children, my sister Alice and my brother Simon. Alice was 9 years older at the time. My brother Simon was 7.5 years older. We subsequently became very close throughout our lives. My parents were not French. They were Polish Jews. And of course, in Poland, they were second-class citizens. Here is a photo of my parents. Next slide. My mother is on the left, my father on the right. Between two of my mother's siblings, and the one next to her is my uncle David, who later played a role in my coming to America. My mother had 6 siblings, only one of whom survived, not counting her eldest brother who had immigrated to the US before the war. He was literally my Uncle Sam. My father had 5 siblings, only one of whom survived. How did my parents wind up in France? In Poland, Jews were barred from most professions, but watchmaking was not one of them. Here is a photo of a watchmaking workshop. My father is second from the left, and 2 over, here's my cursor, two individuals to his left is my Uncle David. So that was the way it worked in those days. Now, it happens that a Polish Jewish watchmaker had somehow established a practice in Paris and was looking for other watchmakers to expand his practice. He apparently knew my father and asked him if he, my father, was interested in working for him in France. My father jumped at the opportunity. My father was well-read. He loved the idea of France, which he regarded as a free and liberal country. Mostly true. But how did they navigate the strict immigration laws of France? It turns out that France was virtually depopulated of men in World War I. The French government felt it needed to repopulate the country, along with the skills that had died with them. And so they let my father and his then fiancée into the country, more or less equivalent to a green card in the US. Until the Nazi invasion, we led a peaceful life. My siblings went to the local elementary schools. I went to free school. My father, who worked for himself, was the wage earner, and my mother did everything else. Our lives were upended in May 1940 when the Germans swept through the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, ignoring neutrality, and then into northern France. People from the countries I just mentioned and from northern France panicked and tried to flee ahead of the German army. As the reality became clear, Parisians began to leave in droves. By the time the Germans entered Paris, two-thirds of its inhabitants had fled. Next slide, please. But the stream of refugees had swelled to 8 million refugees, clogging the roads. The Parisians having been joined by refugees from Belgium and northern France. The French referred to this episode as l'exode, which means the exodus. This was no orderly evacuation. On these roads, German machine gun attacks and bombs from German airplanes terrorized refugees. Our family joined this stream of refugees. But to avoid all of us being killed at the same time, we separated into two groups. My father and my siblings in one group, and my mother and me separately. My brother recalls vividly having to dive into a ditch as German planes started to strafe the refugee column. By the end of June 1940, the Nazis had vanquished France in record time, after which an armistice was declared and overt hostilities ceased. The refugees were permitted to return to their homes. As part of the armistice, the Germans partitioned France into occupied and unoccupied zones, the latter usually referred to as Vichy France. Next slide. And there you can see on that map in light blue, Vichy France, and the rest was occupied France. One crucial difference between the occupied and unoccupied zones is that in the latter, the unoccupied zone, the Jews were not required to wear the Jewish star, which I'll show you presently. For many, this spelled the difference between life and death, and was the reason many Jews attempted to cross from one side to the other. However, the border was guarded, and if you were caught, the next stop was Auschwitz. For a while after the armistice was signed, life seemed to be returning to normal, if one can use that word. Soon, however, the Nazis started to organize their main preoccupation, killing Jews. On September 1940, the authorities demanded that Jews report to their local police station to get identification cards. My parents dutifully obeyed the order. The word Juif was stamped across the identification card in red letters. Then on June 7, 1942, the German military commander in France ordered all Jews over 6 years of age to wear the star. Next slide, please. I was not yet 6 years old, so I did not have to wear that star. However, already in 1941, random arrests started to take place. In May, August, December, in Paris. Those arrested were held in French internment camps before being sent to Auschwitz by train. Next slide, please. When I say by train, it sounds mild, but it was 1,500 kilometers of pure misery, typically lasting several days, packed in cattle cars, standing all the way, with minimal food or water, or none. Many already died before reaching their destination. Of course, the fate of those arrested was not fully known at the time. Nazi propaganda circulated the fiction that they were going to work in camps or factories. The raids just mentioned were only the beginning in France. My parents and their neighbors were well aware of these random arrests. My father no longer went outside our apartment to deliver his work. My mother took over this task. Early in 1942, the so-called final solution was made official Nazi policy. In Paris and its surrounding communities where a majority of Jews lived, the Nazis and the French police set this policy in motion. The largest roundup of Jews in the Paris area was now scheduled for July 16, 1942. It started at 4 a.m. Excuse me. 4,500 French policemen with over 27,000 index cards started knocking on doors. In the end, 13,152 Jews were arrested and eventually transported to Auschwitz. Given the detailed preparation by the police for this roundup, a surprisingly large number of people avoided arrest in one fashion or another. We were among those. How did we escape being arrested? It was pure luck. It happens that my mother had a dental appointment the day before that raid. The dentist had a patient who was a French policeman. That policeman told the dentist about the impending raid or the roundup. That dentist in turn told my mother. Not everyone would believe that this wasn't just a rumor. But my mother decided that it was too much of a risk to ignore the possibility. So that evening, our family slept in the home of our cleaning lady. In the morning, it became clear that that roundup had taken place. Among those arrested were over 3,500 children. Here is what happened to those children as described by the French historian Susan Zuccotti in her book about the Shoah in France. You know, Shoah is a Hebrew word for Holocaust. This book is dedicated, she says, to the more than 3,000 3,500 Jewish children under the age of 14 who were arrested in Paris on July 16, 1942, and forcibly separated from their mothers at the French detention camps of Pithiviers and Bar-la-Hollande. 2 weeks later, their mothers were deported. The children had to fend for themselves until they too were deported. Bewildered, terrified, and alone in sealed cattle cars without light or air, to be murdered upon arrival at Auschwitz. This is what would have happened to me and my siblings if not for this fortuitous dental appointment of my mother's. After the raid, it was clearly unsafe to return home. We did not know if the police would try to return and collect those that they had missed. So from one day to the next, we became essentially homeless. Earlier, I may have noted that before I was born, my family had lived, I don't know if I did that, in Vincennes, just outside Paris, where my mother had become friendly with many people in the neighborhood. in particular local shopkeepers. Among the shopkeepers was a Madame Garnier, who owned a pharmacy. Madame Garnier proved to be an indispensable connection. Our mother was troubled by chronic indigestion, and she would frequently go to Madame Garnier's store to order dry tisane, which in our terminology would be herbal tea. There happened to be another couple, Monsieur and Madame Bonneau. Next slide, please. Here is their photo with their granddaughter. They were clients of this pharmacy as well. The Bonneaus were Protestant. And I mention this because Protestants were more likely to be helpful because they too had been a persecuted minority in France. Around that time, Madame Bonneau came into the store. Madame Garnier told her about our situation. Madame Bonneau said she would be back in a few days with a solution, and so she was. She invited us to come to her home, which was nearby. It would have been impractical and dangerous for all to remain there indefinitely. The first priority was to save the children and to do it quickly. And so on the day we entered Bonneau's house, a man by the name of Monsieur Ernst was waiting for us. Almost immediately, he took me to a train station and then to his house in a Normandy town called Saint-Aubin-les-Elbeuf. Next slide, please. So this is a map of Northwest France and Normandy, as you can see. And this is where Saint-Aubin-les-Elbeuf is right here. And it was just across the Seine, it was bordering on the Seine River and across a larger town called Elbeuf. I mention that because I'll bring it up again. This is the Seine River. Oh, so it turns out that I only stayed a few weeks in the houseboat where Monsieur Ernst took me. The head of the house was a grumpy elderly woman who said she was out of practice dealing with young children. It happens that Monsieur Ernst had some kind of association with the Resistance. You know, you all know what that means, right? The Resistance. And he knew someone from the Resistance in the same village. He got in touch with that family who offered to take me in. This was the Leclerc family. The day that I entered the Leclerc family home was a lucky day for me because it greatly minimized the odds of being arrested. But it was also the saddest day of my life because I was suddenly separated from my brother, my sister, and my parents. And though I did not know it then, it was the last time I ever saw my parents. For the next 3 years, the Leclercs became my family. That day, when I entered their home, I became a hidden child. Unlike the customary image that you may have about that term, which is probably taken from the Anne Frank story, I was hidden in plain sight. I went to the local elementary school. I played with a hoop on the street. On Sundays, I went to church with the Leclercs, but they did not try to convert me. They just wanted me to blend in. Of course, they did not advertise my presence or my religion. Only two persons know my origins. The principal of the school where I went, and a neighbor, Madame Brida, to whose home I went after school because the Leclercs worked past the dismissal time, and she gave me a tartine. You know what a tartine is? A piece of bread and a piece of chocolate. which wasn't that good. But um, I reconnected with Madame Brida many years later when I returned to France in 1989 with Joan. Here are some photos of me with the Leclerc family. Next, this must have been soon after I arrived. That's Madame Leclerc et moi. On the next slide, that's me obviously a little later, posing for a fashion magazine. And you could see on either side of me leaves, which are leaves of vegetables. One of them I know was green beans. I'm not sure what the other was. So we were fairly independent, with about food. In the next slide, probably taken closer to 1945, a typical family picture. Suzanne Leclerc, Marcel Leclerc, Gaston, their son, and me, and you can see the body language that I was part of their family. Next slide, please. So for the years I lived with the Leclercs, and from my point of view as a child, life was uneventful. We didn't lack for food. I showed you the Leclercs had a garden, kept rabbits in the backyard, which were the source of meat. That last photo is telling that our body language gives the feeling of an integrated family. In fact, by that time, the Leclercs wanted to adopt me. The uneventfulness that I just alluded to ended in 1944, when the Allies invaded for France. Earlier that year, before the actual invasion, the Allies started bombing raids in Normandy to so-called, they call soften the enemy positions. And my town, Saint-Aubin, was one of those towns. Unfortunately, many civilians were killed in Allied bombing raids. And any one of those bombs could have been my end, but it was not my time. Then, would I say all hell broke loose on June 6, 1944, D-Day. D-Day had arrived. It was a monumental and bloody operation which defies description. And I imagine you have studied that in Canadian towns. I mean schools. And there's no, there's no way to depict that town, that battle. But a sense of it can be given to you by the next slide. No, one after that. Yes. This is my brother did that painting when he was about 14 years old, where he was hidden. And it gives you a sense of the destruction, everything was going on at D-Day. The Allies had conducted an elaborate deception campaign. So the next slide, I think, is back to the next slide, please. Yeah. The Allies had conducted an elaborate deception campaign that convinced Hitler that the landing would take place at the Pas de Calais. Pas de Calais is right, the closest distance between France and England. But it wasn't. This is where the Allies landed. And the distance between Pas de Calais, which is here, and the landing beaches was about 200 miles, which in those days is a big distance. And much too long for the Germans to be able to bring resources or to stop the invasion of Normandy. Yeah, Pas-de-Calais is 200 miles north from the landing beaches. So D-Day, June 6th, I observe it every day. For me, it's not just a day, a date in the battle. It's the visceral, because it's the beginning of the end of Nazi rule and the smashing of the German army. But for me, it's a feeling of revenge. Little by little, the Allies pushed the Germans back, meaning towards the east. It was painful slogging. In about 3 months' time, a little over 100 miles, about 1 mile per day. I guess you can translate that into kilometers. They had arrived in Elbeuf, right across the Seine from where I lived, Saint-Aubin. The Germans wanted to retreat to Germany. Their immediate problem was crossing the Seine. You can imagine how difficult it is for an army to cross a river, especially if there are no bridges. And the next slide. This is a map of the Seine River. You see there's a snake going around. This is where I was, Saint-Aubin. And the Germans were coming from the left side of this map and trying to go east. But you can see almost everywhere, if they crossed the Seine at one place, they had to cross it again, which incurred even more difficulty, having to cross the river twice. But it turns out that Saint-Aubin was the one place not far from where the Germans were, where they could cross unimpeded and then go straight east. So there were a lot of Germans that were trying to cross the Seine right about where I was. Right around the time when this was happening, there was a major artillery battle that lasted 3 days and rained thousands of shells on Saint-Aubin. It turns out that the Allies who were on the west side of the river, this way, thought the Germans were in Saint-Aubin, and the Germans had already vacated Saint-Aubin going to the east. They thought that the Allies were in Saint-Aubin. So for 3 days, the Allies and the Germans were raining artillery shells on Saint-Aubin, because they each thought that the other was in Saint-Aubin. Again, I don't remember much about that, but I'm sure I was in a shelter. But the shelter is only good if an artillery shell doesn't fall right on it. So I escaped that one. But soon after this artillery battle, the Germans had fled our area, and the Canadian Army thank you, Canadians, crossed the river. Next slide, please. No, we can go to the next slide. So the town in the background is Elbeuf, which is crosses, and this is the Seine River right there. And not the soldiers, but the special corps had built a bridge, a boat bridge, it's called, because I'm not going to go into the incompressibility of water, but that's what allowed this to happen. They used rowboats and erected roadway across it. And this is the first tank that came across from Elbeuf to Saint-Aubin, where I was. Next slide. So of course, the townspeople were what would you say? I have a word here which I can't find.
Overjoyed.
Overjoyed, utterly overjoyed. And little kids, one of which I was, mobbed the soldiers, begging them for chewing gum and cigarettes to give to our elders. I'm not sure if Canadians use chewing gum like Americans, but we didn't know the difference. We were kids. So for me and my town, the war was over. But the effects of the war were not over. At this point in time, we did not know what had happened to our parents. We had received no communication about them or from them, and the Leclercs assumed that they had not survived. They wanted to adopt me, which would have happened except for this. One day, not very long after, a slight gentleman knocked on our door and said he was my uncle. And he's the one that I showed you in one of those earlier slides. And he wanted to retrieve me on behalf of the family. Legally speaking, there was nothing the Leclercs could do about it. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what I think it was the case then. I was allowed to finish the school year in Saint-Aubin, and then my uncle came back for me. But he didn't have the space or the funds for the three of us, my siblings and me. And they had been liberated as well. So we were sent to an orphanage. Although it wasn't an ordinary orphanage, it was called a Maison d'Enfants, children's homes. Next slide. This was the first Maison d'Enfants where we were. All these kids were orphans. The adults who were there were obviously survivors themselves. But this was a photo in Cahiers-sur-Eure in 1946.
Show them you.
What?
Show them you.
Me, I'm this little kid right here. Right here. In 1947, there was suddenly a lot of excitement in that children's home. It turned out that most of the residents were going to board a ship called the Exodus, bound for Palestine. You may know that story. It was a major movie in 1960 called Exodus. But we weren't the ones who went on the Exodus because we had family in the U.S. I mentioned earlier that my mother's oldest brother had settled in the States prior to the war. So next slide. This is a photo of my sister on the left, obviously, my brother on the right, and me in the middle. We took a tour of Paris before boarding a ship to go to the US. And that's what we did. What was on our minds, we took a farewell tour of Paris, and our life in France was left behind. What was not left behind is our wartime experience, which continues to live in me. What was on our minds is what happened to our parents. If they were alive, and how could we find them, or they us? We arrived in New York on October 25, 1949. I was 12 and a half years old, and I knew just two English words, chewing gum. We were going to live in Brooklyn with our Uncle Sam, my mother's oldest brother, whom I mentioned, who had emigrated long before the war. Next slide, please. That's the palace that we moved into. My uncle and his, well, what in this palace, lived my Uncle Sam, his second wife, and her daughter, and her daughter's husband, and their two children, and her bachelor son. So it was crowded, but not very long after, almost everyone found other lodgings, and the sleeping arrangement became more tolerable. Then my brother was drafted into the U.S. Army, and he was sent to Korea, where he could have been killed too. My sister left for Rochester, New York, which was then the center of photography with Kodak. And she had been trained as a retoucher, photo retoucher. So I was left pretty much alone with the remaining folks. I was sent to the local public school, PS 179. I was small then for my age, and since I couldn't communicate with the school administrator or vice versa, I was stuck into fourth grade school. In those days, no special accommodation was made for immigrants. It was sink or swim, and I swam. For a little levity, I want to tell you an amusing anecdote from those early days. It was Christmas time, December 1949, about 2 months after we had arrived. I could already make out some words and sentences, and I could make out that the teacher was asking the kids what they were going to do during the holiday. One after the other, not all, but many, said they were going to Miami. I perked up. These kids were trying to make me feel comfortable. I made a mental note to tell them the proper wording was mon ami, but I never followed suit. I was learning the American way of enterprise. Next slide. And next slide. Yeah, thank you. So this is probably a year and a half later, I started to deliver orders for the stores that are in the background. There was a basket on the front of the bike, and that's what I did. Then it was time I was old enough. I was pushed up a couple because it became clear to the
Teachers.
well, the teachers and the powers that be that I was my brain was older than fourth grade. So I'm skipping time, but now it was the point where I was up to high school. But I absorbed English quickly enough to be able to take and pass an entrance exam to a so-called elite high school, Brooklyn Technical High School, or Brooklyn Tech. And that was the start of a long educational sequence. Does anyone of you heard of Brooklyn Technical High School? Maybe not, but it was one of those that special high schools. And I'm not talking about my study for bright kids. So when I entered this high school in 1952, less than 3 years after I arrived in the States, I was completely naive about how almost anything worked in this country. This country, I mean the States. I made choices without really knowing what they implied, but I made the best choice, actually. There were different tracks. I chose the college prep track. At that time, going to college was a rare thing, 1952. However, I became aware that going to college bestowed a special distinction. I had a sixth sense that education was going to be my way out of poverty. I was lucky that the City College of New York, or CCNY, was free for New York City residents.
Free then.
Then, yes, it was called the Harvard of the Poor. It was not the Ivy League, but it had a sterling reputation. The only hurdle was admittance dependent on passing an entrance exam, which I did. The electrical engineering curriculum, what I chose, was 5 years. The first 2 years covered technical basics like physics, chemistry, mathematics, but also quite a bit of liberal arts, which I liked a lot better. After graduating, I was interviewed by several companies. I accepted an offer from GE, General Electric, which we employees call Generous Electric, because they offered me 4 6-month assignments of my choosing. At the time of graduation, who really knows what it's like to work in a particular discipline? So I was also given the opportunity at the same time to go to graduate school for 2 years for a master's degree. The division of GE that I entered was now getting into the space business. This was the major attraction for me. Not that I really knew the difference between the space business, between the space division and the dishwasher division. But it sounded glamorous. So the group that I chose to work in was satellite communication. After 2 years of work, I realized how little I knew. So I decided to take a leave of absence and go back to graduate school. Fortunately, I was offered a fellowship from NASA, which covered all expenses for 2 years of full-time graduate school, after which I received my PhD in 1967. I retired from full-time employment in 2000, but I have since been doing consulting for my last employer for 1 or 2 days a week at first, and since the pandemic, only 1 day a week, and now altogether nothing.
He's graduated.
In 1989, Joan and I took a trip to France to try to find the Leclercs. Joan understood the psychological importance. Sadly, by that time, Suzanne and Marcel had passed away. But we found Gaston, their son, in the same town. Next slide, please. And there we were. We didn't know where they were, and it was luck that we found them. And obviously, this is Gaston. You saw his picture several slides before. These two happened to be there when we found them. They're their grandchildren. This is his wife. She liked to eat. Micheline is her name. Here's a photo again. So this visit turned out to be the first step in allowing myself to grapple with my wartime trauma. There was one more issue to be dealt with. What had happened to our parents? Earlier, I had mentioned that we had never found out what happened to them. My brother was determined to find out. After contacting all sorts of organizations, national, international, nothing emerged. But then he contacted the French lawyer and Nazi hunter, Serge Klarsfeld. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was a similar type of guy as your Simon Wiesenthal. Mr. Klarsfeld had made it his mission to document what had happened to every single Jew who had been deported from France. And he did so. Searching French and German archives, he published an enormous tome called Le Mémorial de la Shoah, with information about our parents given to him by Simon, by my brother. He determined that Mr. Klausfeld, determined that my parents had been sent to Auschwitz on convoy number 31, September 11, 1942. That train had 1,000 passengers, all of whom were gassed upon arrival. There is a memorial in Paris where all the names in Monsieur Klausfeld's book are inscribed on the wall. Next page, please. So there's about 76,000 names inscribed on these walls. There's more walls than the ones that are shown here. In French, it's called Le Mur des Noms, the wall of names. And here's the next slide, a close-up of one of those walls that show our parents' names. My mother here, my father here. So for us, that was the end of a journey. In a sense, this wall is our parents' gravestone. And I think that's as far as I'm going to go. Now, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Michel. That was, a very powerful, at times difficult to hear, and I'm sure also sometimes difficult to share such personal memories. But we're really grateful for that experience. So yes, as Michel just said, please, if anyone on the call has a question, feel free to add it into the chat as usual. Michel, yes, thank you so much. I do have a question for you. You had mentioned that it was the birth of your first granddaughter that inspired
Grandchild.
you. Sorry, grandchild
Right.
that began you speaking about your memories and experiences during the Holocaust. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Why was it that next generation, and maybe not your own children being born?
Uh, no, my own children, I was more circumspect about telling them my story. I really didn't know how to tell them. By the time my granddaughter was born, I got over that, I don't know what to say, not reluctance, difficulty. So it was, and I felt that I could not be silent anymore. And that was, my granddaughter's birth was a good reason to enter into that fraught memory. So that's what it was. She was the breakthrough.
Mm. And as a follow-up question, I'm just curious because to write a memoir must have been a very difficult, exhausting process. And I'm just curious about what inspired you to start writing your memories down.
Well, actually, it was not difficult.
Mm.
Because it relieved me.
Mm.
Right? And in a sense, my education, which was to explore, came to the fore. So I was thinking more like someone who was investigating. There were a lot of things that I didn't know at that time. And I had to do a lot of research about what had really happened, not just to me, but in general, where I was, about the liberation. And I was fortunate enough to, much of it fine, I put that fine, a French professor of history, who with whom I communicated for over a year. And he told me much more about what had happened in my town, which allowed me to understand the bigger picture then. Um, so it catered to my sense of research, if you will, to find out all those things. It wasn't difficult. It was not emotionally difficult because by that time I'd gone through all the emotions.
Hmm.
Oh,
Fantastic. And another question that we have is why, in the face of some of the challenges in the world today, why do you think it's important for Holocaust survivors to share their memories? What can we learn from Holocaust memories and memoirs?
Well, it's a good question, and that's part of what your organization does, right? Um, I'm not sure if it would touch something in people to become um, more giving, you know, um, more human. Um, it's the only reason, but it's not the first reason why I decided to write. It was for myself
Hmm.
first.
That's so important. Amazing. Oh, and we have a flurry of questions coming in. So we'll just take a couple of extra minutes if everyone is okay with that,
Sure,
so we can
I'm okay with
answer those questions. Um, so one question is, did you have any thoughts, feelings during the birth of the State of Israel or decades later? And you're certainly welcome to answer, but also if you don't want to, that's okay as well.
about the creation of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was happy that it did happen. Um, that was 1947, I believe. Um,
I
at
have,
47, I was
Mm.
10 years old. I was not
Mm.
thinking in those terms.
No, of course. You're not thinking about nation forming so much as being a kid and
Yeah, exactly.
adjusting. Yeah.
yeah, my husband and I met in Minnesota,
Now, who?
met through my brother, who was going to the University of Pennsylvania, as Michelle was. And my
Oh.
parents left their Austria and Germany to go to Israel for different reasons. And my father said there won't be peace in Palestine. This was in the 30s. So our families had some connection that way, and they
Mm.
loved Michelle. They're crazy about it. But these are the things that matter when you're a survivor, or not even a survivor, when you escaped persecution.
Thank you so much. And maybe, Michelle, did you want to introduce us to your wonderful wife? She's a little
Oh,
blurry in the background there, but
oh, okay.
just come for there we go. Perfect. If you stand right there, we can see your face. Hi.
Hello.
My name is
It's
Joan,
great to have you with us,
and we've been married
Joan.
about 55 years.
Beautiful, beautiful, a beautiful couple. We have some very, very kind words in the chat, just people thanking you for sharing your testimony, echoing some of their own personal family, Polish as well as French connections. And I do want to remind everyone on the call that we will be making accessible copies of Michelle's memoir. If you would like to purchase a copy, please reach out to Chris, and we will get that to you in the new year. And we are so thankful that Michelle, you are willing and able to join us this evening. And if anyone does have follow-up questions, send them to us and we'll send them to Michel.
I want to just add that,
Please.
these, whatever's paid for those books, I don't take that money. Whatever is a net profit from those books, I send to the Holocaust Museum in Washington.
That's incredibly generous of you. And one of our guests tonight asks, will Michel sign copies? So if you're able to autograph some copies of your book, that would be really wonderful. But we'll take them without as well. So
I'd have,
whatever
of course,
works.
yes, but if you can gather all of them, I mean, or whatever those requests are, because I'd rather do it in one
Mm,
swell swoop than, one at a time.
personalized. That's beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michel, and thank you everyone for
You're
joining
welcome.
us this evening. Wishing you a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joan.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michel.